19 years, 12 sectors, 7 men, 1 saloon. That was the math the bartender had spent his entire career working out. 19 years to identify the 7 men whose deaths would, if arranged correctly, end the longest Cold War in the galactic frontier. 12 sectors of careful coordination to bring those 7 men into the same room on the same night without a single one of them suspecting the others were coming. And 1 saloon, a saloon nobody had noticed before, a saloon that was not on any map, a saloon that did not in any meaningful sense exist. To receive them all, 6 of the 7 would drink, 6 of the 7 would die, and the bartender, who had planned this night with the patience of a man who had watched 12 generations of frontier killers come and go, had calculated everything except for the 7th man, who 19 years ago had quietly stopped drinking and had never in 19 years told anyone why. Saddle up, partner. If this is your first ride with Orbit Cowboy, hit subscribe and ring the bell. The frontier just got interstellar. Now, let's begin. Wade Halloran did not believe in the saloon at first. He had been driving across the dust flats of a colony world the galactic surveyors had filed under unremarkable. On a route he had ridden 17 times in 19 years, when the sign appeared on the eastern ridge an hour before sunset. The sign read, "The Last Drift. Drinks, dust, dead men welcome." Wade had not seen the sign on any of his previous 17 rides. He stopped his hover truck at the foot of the ridge. He sat for 3 minutes with the engine idling. He was 68 years old, with a bounty on his head in 12 different star sectors, and he had survived 19 years of frontier travel by trusting one rule above all others. If a saloon you had not seen before appeared on a road you had ridden 17 times, you did not enter the saloon. Wade entered the saloon. He entered because 400 meters before the sign appeared, he had seen the dust trail of another vehicle climbing the same ridge. The vehicle was a Threxian pattern transport, unmarked, painted in the matte gray that frontier outlaws used when they were trying very hard not to be seen. And the dust trail had vanished exactly the way Wade's own dust trail would vanish in another 30 seconds, behind the saloon. Wade did not believe in the saloon. He believed, however, in the transport. He parked his hover truck behind the building. He killed the engine. He sat for another minute with his hands on the wheel, calculating, and then he climbed out, adjusted the kinetic action pistol at his hip, and walked through the front door of the Last Drift. The saloon was warm. That was the first thing he noticed. Warm in the specific human way that saloons on the dust frontier had been warm for 200 years. Yellow oil lamps, dark polished wood, a long bar with bottles arranged in the same exhausted order they had always been arranged in. He noticed, too, that there was no music. He noticed that the windows were shuttered. He noticed that the air smelled faintly of whiskey and dust and something else, something he could not immediately place, but which felt, in some small way at the back of his mind, like the smell of a memory he had spent 19 years trying not to have. He noticed the bartender last. The bartender was a man of indeterminate age, not young, not old, not tall, not short. His face had the curious quality of being unmemorable while being looked at, and entirely impossible to forget. Once, a customer had walked away. He was wiping a glass with a cloth, which was something bartenders had been doing in human saloons since the first one had opened on a colony moon 4 centuries earlier, and he looked up as Wade entered with the same calm, unhurried smile that the saloon had been waiting to show him for 19 years. "Evening, Mr. Halloran." Wade stopped just inside the door. He had not used his name in 12 sectors. He had not, in fact, used his name aloud in 19 years. The bartender's smile did not change. "You're the 7th," he said. "We've been waiting." There were 6 other men at the bar. Wade did not turn to look at them immediately. He had been a fugitive for 2 decades, and he had learned, he had taught himself, in the long, careful years of running from the kind of attention his bounty drew, that the moment a fugitive turned to count the men in a room was the moment the men in the room knew exactly which fugitive they were dealing with. He kept his eyes on the bartender. He took 3 slow steps forward, the way a man approaches a poker table when he does not yet know which of the other players is cheating, and he sat down on a stool at the end of the bar, the end farthest from the front door, the end that gave him the best sight line on every other patron, without requiring him to turn his head. Then he looked. The 6 men at the bar were strangers to him. He had never met any of them, but he recognized, with the slow, methodical recognition of a man who had spent 19 years memorizing the bounty rosters of 12 different sectors, exactly who 5 of them were. Krell Vance, wanted in Sector 4 for the assassination of an alien ambassador. Tobias Mathers, wanted in Sector 9 for arms trafficking. Jonas Reed, wanted in Sector 12 for the bombing of a colony relay station. Marigold Crow, wanted in Sector 1 for 43 counts of corporate fraud. Seven Holt, wanted in Sector 7 for the systematic poisoning of a Threxian diplomatic delegation. The 6th man sitting at the far end of the bar in a dark traveling coat with his back partly to Wade was not on any roster Wade had ever seen. But he was, in some small, impossible way, Wade could not quite articulate, familiar. Wade looked down at the bar. There was a glass in front of him. He had not asked for a drink. The glass was full of an amber liquid that looked, by every measure available to a man who had spent 20 years in saloons, like ordinary frontier whiskey. The bartender had poured it without being asked, the way he had poured one for every other man at the bar, and he had set it down in front of Wade with the same calm patience that had brought every other detail of this evening into place. Wade did not pick up the glass. He was 68 years old. He had stopped drinking 19 years ago. He had stopped on a Tuesday night, in a different saloon, on a different colony world, after a different bartender had slid a different glass in front of him, and Wade had, for reasons he had never told anyone, for reasons he had spent the next 19 years of his life refusing to think about, drunk it. That night he had killed 3 men. 2 of them had been friends. He had not picked up a glass since. The bartender at the last drift was watching him. The bartender's smile had not changed. "Your usual Mr. Halloran on the house." Krell Vance drank first. He drank without ceremony, without suspicion, without any of the careful, slow attention that a man on his 4th bounty in his 4th sector should have given to a free drink from a bartender in an unfamiliar saloon. He drank because he was 41 years old and arrogant because he had survived 3 assassination attempts in the past year, and because the kind of bartender who poured for free in a saloon at the edge of the galaxy was, in Krell Vance's experience, the kind of bartender who knew better than to insult him by offering anything but the genuine article. He set the glass down empty. He smiled. Then his face went still. Wade watched it happen with the specific dispassion of a man who had been waiting 19 years to see exactly this moment. Crell Vance's eyes did not roll back. He did not foam. He did not collapse dramatically across the bar. He simply went still, the way a man goes still when something in his chest stops being interested in moving. And he settled forward onto his elbows with the slow grace of a structure that had decided to fall down without making a fuss about it. The bartender refilled Crell Vance's glass without looking. The other 4 men at the bar, Mathers, Reed, Crow, and Holt, drank within the next 40 seconds. They drank because Crell Vance was a known killer, and Crell Vance had drunk first. They drank because the bartender's smile was the smile of a man who had nothing to hide. They drank because the silence in the saloon was the kind of silence that men in their profession had been trained over years to fill with anything that resembled normalcy. They drank, and they died, in the same approximate order they had walked through the door. The 6th man, the one in the dark traveling coat, the one Wade still could not place, drank last. He drank slowly. He drank with the careful attention of a man who knew exactly what was in the glass. He drank, in fact, the way a man drinks when he has come to a saloon specifically to die and has not been able to bring himself to admit it until the bartender has made the choice for him. He set the glass down empty. He turned finally and looked at Wade. His face was lined and old. He had a white beard. He had eyes the color of cold water. He was a man Wade had, in the long, careful years of his fugitive life, only ever seen in classified Threxian asset registry photographs that no human civilian was ever supposed to have access to, and which Wade had nevertheless seen 4 times. The 6th man was Hollis Vane, the man whose face had been on the deepest, oldest, most heavily redacted asset file Wade had ever stolen. The 6th man, Hollis Vane, asset HV1, the only Threxian human asset who had ever retired and lived to tell about it, looked at Wade across the bar with the calm finality of a man who had already accepted the consequences of the decision he had just made. He did not speak. He smiled, very faintly. Then he, too, slumped forward across the bar, and Wade Halloran was the only living man in the last drift. If this ride's keeping you company tonight, hit that bell. What comes next is 19 years in the making. Wade did not move. He had spent 19 years training himself not to move at moments like this. The instinct of a fugitive when 6 men you have just watched die are slumped along a bar in front of you is to bolt for the door. The discipline of a fugitive who has survived 19 years is to sit very still and let the man who killed them tell you why. The bartender wiped the bar. He did this with the same calm cloth, the same calm hand, the same calm patience that he had used to wipe his glasses earlier in the evening. He did not seem in any hurry to address the bodies. He did not seem in any hurry to acknowledge that Wade had not yet touched his drink. He did not, in fact, seem in any hurry at all. Wade waited. After what felt like a long time, and was probably 90 seconds, the bartender set down the cloth. "Mr. Halloran, bartender, you did not drink." I noticed. The bartender smiled. "You were the variable, Mr. Halloran, the one I could not calculate. I had 19 years of intelligence on the other 6. I had bounty records, asset files, drinking habits, preferred whiskeys, the names of the women they thought about when they thought about the women they had loved. I could predict, with a margin of error of less than 3%, which drink each of them would order, which seat at this bar each of them would take, and which moment in the evening each of them would lift a glass to their lips. You, however, I had only old data on, old enough that the data still said you were a man who drank. Wade said nothing. What happened, Mr. Holleran? 19 years ago, on the night you stopped. Wade looked down at the untouched glass in front of him. I shot 3 men, he said. Yes, 2 of 'em were friends. The third one was a man named Reno Hatch, or a man someone told me was Reno Hatch. He survived. The other 2 did not. I never figured out, in the years afterward, which of those 3 was the one I'd actually been sent to kill. All 3, Mr. Holleran? All 3. You were given the contract on all 3. The bartender that night, my predecessor in this particular line of work, slipped you a compound that removed the small inhibition in your nervous system that you had been trained, by the discipline of a long career, to keep in place. You were never ordered to choose, Mr. Holleran. You were ordered to draw. And I did. And you did. And then I stopped drinking. Yes? Wade looked up at the bartender for the first time. Why, he said, are you telling me this? The bartender wiped the bar again. Because, Mr. Holleran, the man who hired me to arrange this evening, the man who has spent 19 years and 12 sectors of patient effort to bring these 7 men into the same room, was the man you did not kill that night. Reno Hatch survived. Reno Hatch found out, in the years after, exactly who had ordered the contract. Reno Hatch identified the 7 specific men who had, between them, designed and operated the asset network that turned good frontier outlaws into killers of their own friends. 6 of those men are now dead in front of you. The 7th man was you, Mr. Holleran. You were on the list. Reno Hatch put you on the list 19 years ago, when he survived the bullet you put in his shoulder. And then he took you off the list. He took you off the list 11 years ago, when his surveyors confirmed that you had not, in those 8 intervening years, taken a single drink. You took yourself off the list, Mr. Holleran. You did it without ever knowing the list existed. The bartender slid Wade's glass aside, gently, and replaced it with a clean one. He filled the new glass with water from a pitcher. He pushed it across the bar. Reno asked me to give you this. Water? The drink you've been ordering for 19 years. Wade looked at the water for a long time. He did not pick it up. He looked instead at the body of the 6th man. Hollis Vane was slumped forward with his white bearded head resting against his folded arms, and the eyes of a Threxian human asset who had retired and was supposed to be impossible to find were closed for the last time on a colony world the galactic surveyors had filed under unremarkable. Why was Hollis Vane on the list? Wade said. The bartender did not answer immediately. Hollis Vane, he said finally, was the original handler, the one who built the asset compound, the one who poured the first drink for the first frontier outlaw in the first saloon, 4 decades before the last drift opened its doors. He retired in 2007. He retired Mr. Holleran the same way you retired, not because anyone let him go, not because his work was finished, because he stopped drinking the work. And then he wrote a memoir. He did. And the memoir named the 7 men. It did, including himself. Including himself. Wade was quiet for a long time. He came here tonight knowing what would happen. He did. Why? Because, Mr. Holleran, there are some debts a man cannot repay by living. Hollis Vane spent 40 years training human assets to kill their own friends. He spent the last 19 years of his life trying to undo it. He found a clone of himself on a porch on Halverson's Reach. He found a young drover who survived the contract you carried out. He found in the long, careful years of his retirement every man on his list. He could not deliver them all. He delivered 6. He chose to be the 7th. Renault's list, Mr. Holleran, was Hollis Vane's list. Hollis Vane wrote it in 1986. He took 40 years to deliver every name on it. The last name he had to deliver was his own. Wade looked again at the body of the 6th man. And what, he said, happens to me? The bartender smiled. You walk out, Mr. Holleran. You go home. You keep not drinking. And in 19 more years, when some bartender you have never met before pours you a glass you didn't ask for, you will remember this evening, and you will know what to do. You will know how to lose. Wade Holleran walked out of the last drift at 11:47 p.m. He did not look back. He did not finish the water. He did not, at any point in the slow, careful walk from the bar to the front door, allow his right hand to move closer than necessary to the kinetic action pistol still holstered at his hip. The bartender did not stop him. The bartender, when Wade reached the door, was already wiping glasses. The night air outside was cold and clean and smelled of dust. Wade stood for a moment on the boardwalk, breathing it. He looked up at the sky, 3 pale moons, an unnamed colony's worth of stars, the slow turning of a galaxy that had been, for 19 years, the only place he had been able to live without ever once being able to settle. He walked to his hover truck. He started the engine. When he looked in the side mirror as he pulled away from the saloon was no longer there. Wade Holleran drove for 6 hours back across the dust flats, and he did not stop, and he did not speak, and he did not, when the first sun rose, take the small sealed envelope out of his coat pocket. The envelope he had not noticed the bartender slipping in there during the long, careful walk to the door. He waited until he was home. He waited until he had parked the hover truck. He waited until he had walked into the small ranch he had bought 11 years ago, with money that had not, since the day he stopped drinking, ever come from a bounty. He sat down at his kitchen table. He opened the envelope. Inside was a small, handwritten note on paper that looked older than it should have. The handwriting was sharp and careful, the handwriting of a man who had written over the course of his life many letters to many people, and who had learned that the most important letters were the shortest. The note said, Mr. Holleran, I did not get to thank you in 1991. I am thanking you now. The bullet you put in my shoulder is the reason I am alive. It is the reason every man on the list is dead. It is the reason you are reading this letter. A man I worked with once told me that the difference between a killer and a man is what he does the morning after. You stopped drinking the morning after. That is why your name was on the list. That is why your name was taken off. Ride well. Reno Hatch. Wade Holloran read the note 3 times. He set it down on the kitchen table. He poured himself a glass of water from the pitcher beside the sink. He sat for a long time in the slow rising light of a colony morning, drinking water and thinking about 19 years. Somewhere on a quiet ranch on Halverson's Reach, on a porch where 2 old men with the same face had begun slowly to age together, an envelope identical to the one in Wade Holloran's hand was being received by a 72-year-old man named Hollis Vane, who would never, in the 19 years still left to him, find out that the bartender had let him survive. That was the saloon at the edge of the galaxy. Wade Holloran, 6 dead killers, and the 19-year discipline that kept him alive. If this ride hit the spot, saddle up, subscribe, ring the bell. Ride with us every week. And before you go, partner, drop a comment below. If you were Wade Holloran sitting at that bar with a free drink in front of you and 6 dead men beside you, would you have walked out, or would you have stayed long enough to ask why? Until next time, keep your guns clean and your stars closer.